Can I have your attention for a second? Before David's presentation, just want to thank Biz for helping us out. And, we thank you very much for presenting to us today.
Well, thank you all for inviting me here and giving me an opportunity to share a little bit about what's been going on in your backyard, depending on where your backyard is. My backyard is in Warren, and I live right back up there in the corner of Burrs Hill Park. How many people have been to Burrs Hill Park? Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, you can't miss it. Right, you head down Water Street, you're right there. But not many people know the history of that park. I'm in the process now of getting an interpretive sign put there. But that was a burial site for probably 2 centuries for native people who were living around here, and there were many of them then, prior to 1660 when Osamequin, probably better known as Massasoit, but that's his title. He's the Massasoit Osamequin, which means yellow feather. He was the chief of the chiefs of 31 tribes in the area when the Pilgrims arrived in 1620. We're going to be celebrating the 400th anniversary of that arrival next year. That occurred at a time when the colonial history was just beginning here. I got interested in this with the King Philip War. And some of you may know about it more recently. Most of us heard something in school, I hope.
Is that on King Philip's ship?
Yeah. Well, you see the name King Philip all over the place. But we rededicated a monument to Hugh Cole, who had a well in Warren, and I got a little more interested. I started a website, and then I met this woman, Helen Jadis. Anybody know Helen by any chance? She worked in Barrington largely and around the area, and she said, you know, there's so much history around here that people really don't know or know how to discover. Why don't we start a heritage area? You've all heard of the Blackstone Valley Heritage Area? Okay. We want to do a Sowams Heritage Area from Providence down to Bristol, and including Swansea, Seekonk, and Rehoboth. If we're successful in that, in 10 years, more people will know and appreciate the very unique history that happened since that encounter in 1620. These are maps of the various tribes in the area. This one done by Bicknell. This is a map of the Pokanoket territory. How many have heard the name Pokanoket? I know you have. Okay. We hear normally Wampanoag, but Wampanoag was a name that was never used prior to the King Philip War. And every map that you see is Pokanoket, like on that map. And only after the war were the people who were remaining after the war told that you could not call yourself Pokanoket, you couldn't speak the language, and if you're 14 years of age or older, they could shoot you on sight. So things really changed rapidly for the tribe after the war. And now we call them Wampanoag, but they're really Pokanoket, and we're working to bring back the knowledge of people, of familiarity with the Pokanoket tribe. They, of course, were part of people who lived here for at least 10,000 years since the glaciers receded. Okay. And were living quite successfully until the colonists showed up, particularly the traders. And the initial ones before Plymouth, who weren't interested in settling the area, but came here to trade, particularly for furs, brought with them an unwelcome visitor. They brought with them disease, and those diseases changed a successful tribe into one where 90% of the people living along the coast were dead between the years 1616 and 1619. So it was as if somebody dropped a nuclear bomb on the south coast of Massachusetts prior to the Pilgrims' arrival. So when they came into the village, and you can read these accounts, they found nothing but bones on the ground because there weren't even people alive to bury the dead. How did the Pilgrims take it? Pretty much the way they take everything, a sign from God that He had prepared the way, okay? And in fact, they had a terrible time that winter. Half of them died, but they were being watched by members of the Massasoit tribe, and discovered that these people were not traders. They weren't going away. They brought women and children. So maybe this would be an opportunity for the Massasoit to strike a deal with them for protection. Because what did the colonists have? Guns. Okay. Massasoit was concerned with the Narragansetts, who were breathing down his neck from the other side of the bay and would love to have moved into this area. So he needed an ally. And he got together with the Governor Carver in Plymouth in March of 1621. That was the first encounter. That wasn't the Thanksgiving encounter, though there are many versions of that encounter. But what they did was strike a deal for what's now known as the Wampanoag Treaty. It should be the Pokanoket Treaty. But that treaty from March of 1621 guaranteed the protection, mutual protection between the Pilgrims and the colonists and the native people here for over half a century. If that treaty hadn't been honored, we'd be speaking Dutch. Ed Winslow from the Mayflower and decided that after that treaty he should come and visit the Massasoit here in his home. He was living in something called Sowams, and that was the area that was loosely translated the area of the cleared land, because through twice-a-year burnings, the native people had cleared out the forests so that you could ride a horse through them. You could, they cleared fields where you could plant, and what were the colonists interested in? Raising their animals. So this place looked like England to them when they arrived, unlike the rest of New England. So Ed took a little 2-day walk from Plymouth down to probably Tyler Point in Barrington. There's different views of where the Massasoits Ritu was at that time, but best guess, if you follow Bicknell's reasoning, was the southern end of Barrington. And that visit and the subsequent one 2 years later in 1623, when the Massasoit was ill, deathly ill, and what they thought was his deathbed. He was blind and sickly and couldn't move. Winslow comes and does what any good colonial leader would do. He administers the medicine of the time, some potions and one thing or another. He even ordered some chicken soup to be made, but the chicken never arrived in time. In any case, the Massasoit recovers. He gets his eyesight back, he feels better, he gets up, and he embraces Winslow and says, "Winslow, you're my friend for life." That cemented that relationship that lasted until his death in 1660. At the time, the area of cleared land looked more like this. There were native villages in the area, and a trading post was established probably in Barrington near Tyler Point in 1632. This was not uncommon. This is the Hoxie house that you can go to on the Cape, but it's probably very similar to that. There are no structures left from that period. They were all burned during the King Philip War. But if you know something about the history, you know that this area was of particular value to Miles Standish. Miles came here and bought land. He never lived here, but he described this as the garden of the patent and the flower, F-L-O-U-R, of the garden. So much for English spelling at the time. But again, he promoted this area as a place that the colonists should move into. And then year after year, there were all kinds of treaties. We'll talk about that in a minute. One of the people who came down to this area was none other than Roger Williams. If you know the story, Roger had come over from England, was initially in Boston, then moved down to Plymouth for 2 years. They didn't like his religious politics, so he took a job up in Salem. That lasted about a year, and they didn't like his politics there either, because he had a whole different view of religion and the state and who should be in charge of people. So they issued an order that they're going to take him back to England, put him on a ship in January of 1636. He left 3 days earlier, walked from Salem down to probably Warren, because we know in that journey he stayed at a place called Margaret's Rock. Okay, this is just, the rock is on private property just over the Swansea line north of the north end of Warren. If you know Birch Swamp Road, it's in that area there. And now the Williams family has a marker there, and we take people on walks over to that rock. If he hadn't been nursed to health by the native woman named Margaret and sheltered by the Massasoit over that winter and recovered from his terrible illness that he had when he got there, Providence never would have happened. But he did. He left in April and went over to Omega Pond. How many people have visited the monument to the spring over there? It's on Roger Williams Avenue. 2 people, all right. You got to have a deep interest in history, because you drive right by it and you can't even see the thing. It's way in the back. You have to park, get out, walk up there, and finally you read all this about Roger Williams. Well, that was the first place that Roger landed and brought his family and followers down, started farming there, but in June, after the crops began to, just this time of year when things start to grow, he gets word from Plymouth, you're in our territory, you gotta leave. So, you probably all heard the story of him rowing across the Seekonk River, meeting Canonicus, what cheer, knee top, the greeting there, and then goes around the peninsula and up the river, founds Providence, and if you go to the Roger Williams Memorial downtown, okay, if you haven't been there recently, it's worth a stop. They're open 7 days a week, 9 to 5. You can park there, go in, see everything in about 15 minutes, or stay and look at the video and stay longer. In there, you'll see a painting that was done, a contemporary painting by Hugh Blackburn, showing what that settlement probably looked like around 1650. And if you can see in this, this is the Great Salt Pond. What's that reduced to now? Water fire, okay? The little pond there, all right? That's the remnant of that pond was huge, and it's been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And we were building bridges and the whole story. This is Smith Hill. This is where the State House is now. It was a hill then, okay? And way in the back there's another hill, the highest one in that part of the state, Newtaconicut Hill. Anybody been there? Not many, right? I never knew a thing about it. Helen Drader used to take walks up there with people and tell them the Indian history. That's the western boundary of the city of Providence. And it was important to the native people because that was a meeting place between the Okanokets, the Massachusetts, the Nipmucks, and the Narragansetts. So they would come together for councils.
All the way down Atwell's Ave, almost on the Cranston border?
Yes, well,
is that
yeah,
what that is?
right. And it overlooks Silver Lake District, Okay, it's a nice place. In the city of Providence, you've probably seen the Weybosset Bridge at the bottom of College Hill. That's the 8th version of a bridge that's been there since 1660. The first bridge was put in, and guess who the toll taker was? Roger Williams. See, he's a businessman. He had to learn, know how to make a little money back then.
He probably ran the parking lots.
Yeah. There's a great interpretive signage on the east side, on the college side of the bridge. You might want to stop and look at it. And the first settlement here in this area was by Newman, right? Who came down with his group from Weymouth, okay, and established this church. That's not the building he built back then. I think it's the 4th building. I'm correct on that, but it's 1643. Okay. And, pardon me? No, it's congregational.
That's
right. But there's more to come about the Baptists. Okay. So you can see a lot of the people who were part of that community. Unfortunately, all of the houses prior to the King Philip War were burned at the time, so there aren't any houses still standing from that period of time. But I don't need to tell this group about the Ring of the Green, right? You're familiar with that. But that was the settlement at that time, and you can still find remnants of that. We talked earlier about Hunts Mills, where the first mills were built. Again, prior to 1700. Okay, so this is some of this 16th century, 17th century history in the area, and you can find good interpretive signage there and learn a little bit more about that. We also launched the Sowams Heritage Area project there last October. Up in Rehoboth, a place that I didn't know until I got into this whole thing. Rehoboth was the name of the entire territory before Seekonk and then East Providence split off, and you probably know some of that history as well. But there's still interpretive signage there showing some of the what they call the blockhouse. It was a garrison house used during the King Philip War to protect the colonists from the natives, who successfully burned down much of that town as well, and 25 other towns across all the way up to Deerfield, Massachusetts. I won't go through the whole history of all the border changes in the town, but it's fascinating when you learn that Barrington was really Warren at a period of time, and then got split off again, and various parts of what are now East Providence were Swansea, and you can follow that whole history through there. This is a map that Van Edwards does a great explanation. It's online if you want to look at it. Basically, by the time of the King Philip War broke out, you had English settlements encircling the only remaining territory for the tribes down here in Bristol. That was the only land that hadn't been sold, and the numbers of native people had dwindled enormously from the time of the landing of the Pilgrims, estimated around 15,000, down to probably less than 700 by the time of the King Philip War, because there was continued outbreaks of disease, the stress of colonization, the inability to raise crops, the loss of hunting and fishing, and all kinds of things. So the tribe was basically about to go out of existence when a skirmish had happened in Warren, and the war started, and then I won't tell you the whole history of the war. It's worth a couple of hours. But that war really brought to an end any kind of native domination of the land at that time. And those native people who weren't killed were enslaved or driven out of the area. So this notion that there were no more Indians left in New England is not true, but that there was a concerted effort to make that happen. You can can still see some evidence of this. This is over in Melville Farm in Bristol, place where Philip was shot at the end of the war. There's a marker where the Miles Garrison, which sort of looked like that, once existed. All of this is on the website. You can go up to Rehoboth and find Anawan Rock. Okay, some of these are familiar places. There are burial grounds all over the place. If you know where to look, I love the ancient Little Neck Cemetery. If you haven't been there, it's worth a visit all by itself. And various open lands. This is the Chase Farm in Warren, which is a King's grant in 1697. It's been in family ownership since then. And you know about Brigham Farm, okay, which was an original farm in that area. The key farm also in Warren. Lots of natural areas still around and worthy of preserving, and this is what Helen was very much interested in, is making sure that we did not lose these vestiges of what this land looked like 400 years ago. In Swansea, you can find Abrams Rock, in also across from Johnson's Market on Market Street in Swansea. Don't miss on the one side of the road, King's Rock, which was the place where Native women used to grind corn, and on the other side, a perched or balanced rock, I believe, placed there by Native people, though Tim Eisen, the state geologist, won't agree with me. Anyway, so back to my backyard. In Burrs Hill, which had been a native burial ground, we built a railroad in 1852. And when you build a railroad, you have to have level tracks. So to do that, you have to fill in a lot of areas, right? Where do you go? You go to a place of natural sand and gravel, easy digging, because in 1852 they didn't have steam shovels, okay? So they began pulling sand and gravel out of what is now Burrs Hill Park. You now see a large flat area of the ball field there. That was rolling hills. Up until really about the 1920s when the park was built. But because that sand and gravel allowed people to bury people, if you only have a clamshell hoe, you're not going to go digging anywhere around here in the rocks and roots, okay? But you could dig in that sandy area overlooking the park there. And so, bit by bit, native graves were looted. People took stuff home. And finally, in 1913, the director of the George Hill Library in Warren, Charles Carr, who was my wife's predecessor, she worked there in the 90s, decided that he was going to exhume the remaining graves. He got permission from the railroad, did that, took items out from 42 graves, and then those went to museums all over, Heffenbecker, Harvard, A Museum in New York, etc. So that's where the remaining items, including, we believe, the remains of the Massasoit, because they found a gold lace collar that was described in one of the colonial records. So it's likely that that was his gravesite.
Was King Philip his son? Or was the
King Philip was his son. This is the Massasoit who was buried there. Philip, unfortunately, was drawn and quartered, and his head was placed on a pole in Plymouth for 20 years, so he didn't get a proper burial, okay? But his father did. The Native American Burial Reclamation Act of '92, the federal law, said that the tribes could go get their burial items back, and that's what they did. The Mashpee tribe, Mona Peters in particular, spent 20 years gathering items, and then 2 years ago got permission from the town to dig a hole, put a vault underground, and they had a ceremony and reburied over 600 items that had been taken from those gravesites. They're now back there, covered with this monument, which you can visit, to remain there, hopefully forever. I won't go into, let me take a few questions. This is, Bristol was laid out soon after that. You can see that was the first house in Bristol. You go by it when you drive on Hope Street there, 1680. The wood was brought over from England.
Right across from like Agave restaurant.
Yeah, right, and next to the Guitarra School, there's a little park there. These are some of the items from there. They're houses pre-1700 in Bristol, but also in other communities, as well as East Providence. Unfortunately, the only one you can visit is the one in the upper right, the John Martin House, which is in Swansea, and it's open Sunday afternoons, June, July, and August, I think until September now, 1 to 4, and it's a nice tour there. It's owned by the Colonial Danes of Massachusetts. But the tribe is still alive and well, and I talked with one of this is the Sagamore, Bill Guy, and he was your neighbor. We were talking earlier. He lives in Barrington, okay? And we got a grant from the Rhode Island Council on Humanities, and we're doing the 8th of 10 programs where the tribe comes in, does drumming and dancing for kids in the schools around here. So we'll be wrapping that up. If you want to see them, they'll be at the Audubon on Saturday at 11 o'clock. So the tribe has not disappeared. In fact, what's happening is we're getting a resurgence because attitudes have changed. 30, 40 years ago, you wouldn't say you were Native American because of the prejudice against you. Now people are proud to say that, and they're doing that more, and we're helping them get recognized again. We hope to make a heritage corridor similar to the Blackstone Valley Heritage Corridor. We're also putting in a series of interpretive signs. We've got 8 planned, 2 in East Providence, one at the Newman Church across the street, and the other over on Roger Williams Avenue at the Spring site, because it'll be close to the street and you get the whole story. These are the, the 30 by 30 inch ones with color pictures and maps and the whole thing. Unfortunately, the idea of just doing an engraving or a bronze plaque doesn't fly anymore. It's great for the 1930s, but we can do better now. And these will all have QR codes, so you can get on your phone and you find one of these locations. There are 50 of them, and like you see in the brochure, you'll then learn about all the others at the same time. So that's the idea of a heritage trail. So go online. You've heard just a brief introduction here about this. There's over 100 pages on this website. You can look up just about anything. There are videos there, and it's a good opportunity. I think since this is the Chamber of Commerce and we're interested in promoting business in this area, right? One way you do that is to have a reason for people to come here. And just like the Blackstone Valley Heritage Area has brought businesses in and brought people in, we can do the same thing if we establish a heritage area. It's a national act that requires funding from Congress, but they're still funding them. There are 52 of them in the country now. You may have been, I go up to Essex County in north of Boston. That's a heritage area, okay? That's part of this program that the federal government and the National Park Service has. So if we can get support from that, and I may be calling on you for letters in a few years for our congressman to please fund this. It's easy. It's $300,000 a year, which is chump change for them. The whole program nationally is $21 million for 52 sites. Not bad, huh? And businesses love it because it's a way to bring people in and explore the area, and it gives them a reason to stay and poke around. Okay? So that's what we're into. I'll take a couple of questions, and then I think my time is up.
That last slide you just showed.
Yep.
Is that a coin?
Yes.
That was a coin.
If it's a dollar coin, you can get these. It's a Sacagawea coin. Okay. It has the native woman from Wisconsin, I believe. On one side of the coin. On the other side is the Wampanoag Treaty. It's the only time the federal government, to my knowledge, has ever acknowledged officially the Wampanoag Treaty, which was probably the most significant document. I know everybody talks about the Mayflower Compact. Well, that was among colonists so that they could govern themselves. But it wouldn't have meant anything if they hadn't had a treaty with the one tribe who could easily have wiped them out if they didn't, if they didn't have an understanding, which they did. And there was a lot of support between the native people and the Europeans.
And that etching that you showed at the beginning, that showed the treaty being agreed to,
Yes,
is that building, is that known where that took place?
that building doesn't exist, and yeah, that's an artist's rendering. In fact, it was when the Pilgrims first landed, they built very crude houses, none of which survive today. And it wasn't until 10 years later that they began. Yeah, no, it's just some kind of shelter. I mean, imagine this is, it's December, the winter's closing in. What you're gonna feed all these people? Most of them stayed on the boat. Any other questions? You're interested in supporting one of the interpretive signs here in East Providence? Let me know. I'll show you some examples of those. But otherwise, thank you very much.